Hey everybody, welcome to Voltage Control Lab. Lots of modular streams going on today. Hopefully you can make it in. Hopefully we'll get a few people in here. And if you are a pro internet user, you might have multiple windows open right now, multiple videos streaming at a time. And kudos to you if so. Um, all right. So, this is Voltage Control Lab, voltagecontrollab.com. Thanks for joining us. This is Mod City Live, our weekly Saturday show at noon. Thanks so much for all of our friends, HR, Bazi. Hopefully, I said that right. Quantum Space. Good to see you all. Um, all right, we're just going to do some live patching today. Figured we would touch on a few things. Saw the new and awesome DivKid module released this week. Olux, how you doing? Mentioning shout out to Surge Modular. Karush, great to see you again. KD, my old friend, great to see you in here. Okay, well, some updates. This was a wild week. Obviously, we've been in a number of wild weeks, unprecedented times, but this was our last week of school for the term at Icon Collective and as well at Musicians Institute. And the last time we had a break, we did the maybe inadvisable move of live streaming every day at noon. And I don't think we're going to do it every day at noon this break. I think maybe we'll do a week of that. We'll see. Planning on that. Let us know if you have any thoughts, any subjects you'd like us to cover in a kind of segmented amount of time, a daily type of live stream. Again, probably not every day, not every week, but at some point in the next couple of weeks, we'll be doing some sort of special live streams uh, in addition to our regularly scheduled weekly ones. And I'll have time to put together our store and merch and all that stuff. Turn up the volume. Let's see. It's saying we're already pretty high, but let's try this. Maybe that will help. If not, let me know. Maybe I just need to speak a little bit louder. Um, so, yeah, in the next few weeks, I'll have time to finally update our store or create a store to begin with and things like that. So maybe we'll be able to get you guys some stickers and maybe get some t-shirts, maybe some VCL badges, pins, that type of thing. Yeah. Anyway, any thoughts about DivKid's module out there? DivKid's, of course, released a few modules right now. He started with his amazing mutes module. Started with the, his second module was a partnership with Instruo in the form of Oct, spelled OCHD, if I'm not mistaken, and that was a 8-channel. There. Let's see. I have a second window open, and the volume over there is at about 10% of this one, meaning it's way quieter, or this one's way quieter. I'm not sure how we can fix that in the moment, but uh, the new one. Let's talk about the new one for a minute, because this kind of deals with an important function in synthesis, something that we take for granted if we use synths inside of the DAW regularly, and that's sample and hold, random value generating. Uh, so, why would we use random values? Where do we get random values? How can we use random, randomly changing modulation source? Well, sample and hold is a kind of special. Let's see. The only way to hear you is to have the other one nearly off. Interesting. Well, My stuff's cranked. I think I need to make some changes inside of the audio interface at that point. But and if I go too much louder, I'm afraid I'm going to get some sort of uh, distortion, and I don't want to blow you guys out of the water with noise. Hmm. Well, we're gonna have to test something out this week, I guess. But we'll work with what we have for now. I wish I could do more quantum space. It might be a limitation of my audio interface. And let's see. There's one other thing I can check. What were we talking about? We were talking about DivKid's new module. Um, DivKid's new module is 6 channels of pink noise generating. Pink noise generators. A certain type of noise. There are many colors of noise. Each one has a little bit of different color in terms of the brightness, in terms of the distribution of loudness of the noise across the frequency spectrum. And pink noise is, especially I think in modern electronic music, very important type of noise. In fact, a lot of electronic music mastering is done, and EQing of in the mastering process is done to match the frequency response curve of pink noise. Slightly lower in the high frequency range than the low frequency range. There's a lot of mixed thought on that, I suppose. But pink noise is very similar to white noise, just maybe a little bit less present in the high frequency range. And maybe that makes it useful for sample and hold. It might give us a little bit more controllable frequency range, a little bit more musical frequency range for applying that noise around the system for creative uses. Sample and hold as a function, we've done some videos on sample and hold. So if you'd like a proper walkthrough of what sample and hold is, a little bit more well scripted description of sample and hold, then maybe refer to one of our older videos. But I'll try to encapsulate it here. The idea with sample and hold is we send a signal in. It could be any kind of signal. In the case of DivKid's new module, that signal is white, or rather pink noise. And then we trigger or clock the sample and hold, which is receiving some sort of other signal. Could be a sine wave, could be a low frequency oscillator, could be pink noise, could be any signal. But we're going to clock that sample and hold, and we're going to tell it to freeze the signal that's coming into the input at a certain voltage level and hold it as a direct current. So incoming to the sample and hold device is some fluctuating current. Could be an alternating current. It could be a direct current. We could send a sequence into it, right? And if we trigger the sample and hold on a certain step of the sequence, that step, that voltage will be held indefinitely until we clock the sample and hold again, at which point it will look to its input again, and it will freeze it wherever that moment, wherever that voltage happens to be when clocked, when triggered, right? So we can look at an example of this, but the idea is that we can create direct currents from fluctuating currents. If we do that really fast, then we might get the effect. Let's say we sent a low frequency sine wave into sample and hold, and we start triggering or clocking the sample and hold many times across the cycle of that sine wave, right? The sine wave does one long rise and fall and rise back up to the 0 point over, let's say, a second, and we're clocking the sample and hold, 10 times a second. We're going to get effectively a downsampled version of that sine wave. It will be a stepped version of that sine wave. the smoothness will go away, and it will all of a sudden start to adopt some jagged edges. Let's look at an example. Let's come over here. Now, mind you, I don't have DivKid's new module here, but the concept is an important and universal one, and we can look at that in some other module. Let's think about where we might find that. Over here, I have a Sputnik modular random source and fluctuating module. Let's see if we can get over there. Getting the camera there is going to be the challenge. Oh, and the mic. We don't usually go this deep into the system. Okay, just moving things around here. Let's see if we can get there. So, sample and hold. Oh, we're very close. Let's just move this cat scratcher out of the way. And I think we might be there. All right, that might be close enough. Let's get it down in there. Okay, so here is the West Coast random source from Sputnik Modular. I do not think that this is still available. Now, don't quote me on that. You might look at, if anyone's on the internet right now, maybe check it out and tell me if this is still available somewhere. But I believe these are modules intended to sort of take a great deal of inspiration from the Buchla. And the West Coast random source here is a few different modes. We have a fluctuating random voltage. We have a quantized random voltage section. We have a stored random voltage section. Each of these is going to generate some odd random material. So we might not necessarily use those parts. On the right side, up here, we have a sample and hold. Okay, the sample and hold takes a clock in, and then as well down here we can take a signal in. And then from that signal we can get either a couple of different versions of the wave. It is a big module, but it's doing a lot, right? It's doing a great deal of stuff in one module. There's also a noise source sort of bank at the bottom with pink, white, and blue noise. So we can route it internally. It's meant to be kind of patched within itself, where we take one of these random voltages, maybe we patch it to the sample and hold. We take one of the noise sources, patch it to the sample and hold. We also have this integrator function in the bottom, which if I recall, is just a, I can't remember if it's an attenuator or a slew generator. Maybe we'll find out in a minute. But we're going to take, let's start with a very simple wave. And we'll keep the camera over here for a minute until we get an idea of what the patch looks like. And then we'll maybe move over to the oscilloscope, which will show us with a little bit more definition what's actually happening here. So, okay, let's take a signal coming out of, let's say, maths. Just a simple rise and fall linear signal. I'll slow this down so it's more of an LFO. And I'm going to route it to the CV input on the sample and hold. Okay, and then I believe the outputs below that, there's like 3 different outputs. And did something ring your bell, Mark? I hope that was in a good way. I hope that some signal didn't come through and just knock you out. Okay, we're going to take one of those outputs, that middle output, I believe. I think the other 2 outputs will sort of alternate clocks or something like that. Let's figure that. Let's find out together. And then we're going to take that. I'm going to route it over here to the scope, which we'll look at in a moment. And then out of the scope into control the pitch of an oscillator. Maybe we'll do my old friend plates over here. and then I'll just route that up so that we can hear it. Okay, hopefully we can hear that. We'll turn that down for a minute, or rather we will turn it up to an audible level, and then we'll mute it. Okay, there we go. So we're going to take this signal, which right now isn't even passing really through the sample and hold, but we have to trigger the sample and hold for it to grab what's coming in and send it along. So we need to clock the sample and hold. Maybe what I'll do for right now is I'll use one of these cool MG1s that we got last week. These are the SynthWorks, whatchamacallit, arcade button trigger controllers. Okay, so now we're going to pulse this by hand. Okay, let's unmute the channel. And there it goes. Let's slow down this rising and falling signal. Not that quite. Not quite that much. Okay, let's turn the pitch way down. There we go. Okay, that's sending gates, and I think we just need a pulse. So we could also send this from some other control. Let's see, let's try pressure points. Okay, now this is of course just a rising and falling LFO, right? This is one channel on maths cycling in linear mode, playing in what is it, 8 volt, 0 to 8 volt triangle wave, effectively. So as we trigger the sample and hold, we're freezing that rising and falling triangle wave wherever it happens to be when we trigger it. And if we trigger it fast enough, then we get a little bit more of the you know, a sense of that rising and falling motion. We can track it. But if we just clock it, right? If we speed that triangle wave up and just randomly clock it, or clock it on a time basis. Oh, that's right. My Tempe doesn't send clocks anymore. Maybe sounds a little bit more random. We're hitting it in time, but it might be rising or falling. Okay, so Bazi is asking, where does the other end of the blue cable go? That's the output, and that's going along down the line here to control the volts per octave on plates. So that is routed through data, through my oscilloscope at the moment, so we can visualize this in a second, to the volts per octave input on my oscillator. Here, I'll just show you here. Let's mute this for a second. Okay, so we're going from maths, channel 4, following this cable down to the input, the CV input on our sample and hold section here. Sorry, that's a little bit out of focus. This is the limitation of a webcam. Okay, and then we're clocking. That orange cable is a clock in, or at this point, pressure points gate. So whenever I hit pressure points, it's triggering the sample and hold. And then the blue cable comes down here to the data. So when I trigger things, we can see it's going to change the value on data there. We'll look more at this in a second. And then we come on the rest of the way down here, and it goes right into plates. And that's what we're hearing change pitch. So, you know, this is just sample and hold with a rising and falling triangle wave. What about instead of a triangle wave, if we use pink noise, like in DivKid's new module? And there's pink noise coming out here. And now we need to trigger that pink noise. So maybe let's find a clock. Let's take you could just use end of cycle on maths and speed it up a little bit. All right, let's hear this. I believe these are low amplitude noise sources as well. So there's the current tuning of the oscillator, and if we send the sample and held signal into the volts per octave input, so notice that this kind of lower voltage pink noise keeps the pitch within a certain window of space, right? It's not jumping huge octave ranges or anything like that. It's just going within a maybe like, you know, 1 or 2 octave range, basically. Let's try white noise. I think the range is really just a matter of the fact that these are very low amplitude noise sources. So we need to look at the DivKid module specs and see how wide of a range the noise is. Something we could control with an attenuator. But this is just the nature of this particular module. The noise sources are kind of low amplitude. Blue noise. We might not notice much of a difference between each of these going into sample and hold, right? We might notice more difference if we actually heard the output of them. There'd just be simply a difference in the brightness. Maybe worth a listen. Let's try it out. Try to watch our levels here. Okay, there's blue noise. White noise. Pink noise. I don't know, they sound very... It doesn't sound all that different to the pink noise to me. Okay, I guess it's a little different. Blue noise, much brighter. So, you know, in terms of the tone of the actual noise, I suppose if we call it tone, the frequency spectral makeup of the noise. Um, this matters. This makes a difference. Okay, let's take this noise. We're gonna sample and hold it, and then let's try to make something actually musical out of it. Because I know when we end up with these patterns that are just like constantly changing and not adhering to any kind of musical, maybe traditional musical scale, this might not seem all that musical to begin with. So let's maybe bring our camera over here so we can look at data. So you can see how little bit of a voltage change there is here. And we can... So now each one of these boxes is basically 1 volt. And at most, it's hopping into maybe like that second box. So like a -1 to 1.5 or 2 volt range here. Very slim range, but that kind of makes it useful for something like, say, a bass line, something like this, or maybe subtle modulation. We'll try that in a second too. But let's take this signal, and before we go to the volts per octave, we're going to send it into one of our scale tools. We'll send it into the scale effect, the scale, what do they call it? Scale duet mode on Hemisphere Suite on the Ornament and Crime. So turn that mode on. I'm going to send this into CV input 1 on that channel. Whoops. Cables are flying. Oh, Travarsi's in the chat. What's up, Travarsi? Okay. All right, so we're just setting up a quantized version of this noise, right? So here's the signal now. Is this the right channel? Is this, no, blah, blah, what am I doing? Okay, let's look at the instructions here. Yeah, CVN1. Okay, and then I clock it. And let's take the same clock that we're going to get to clock our sample and hold. Bring that down, and we'll trigger our quantizer with that same clock. Okay, so what do we have here? We've got our sample and held pink noise that's passing into the visualizer here, and that is going into now a quantizer. We haven't set up a scale on the quantizer yet. We're simply doing our chromatic scale. So it should be only slightly more fitting into a musical scale. Things should basically be nudged to the nearest 1/12 of a volt. But now we can actually set up a scale. And I can remove notes from the octave. So I kind of have a major pentatonic scale now. instantly a little bit more musical, right? Now, it might be constantly fluctuating still, but, you know. We've constrained the randomness into something a little bit more musical. Okay, so that's kind of cool. Um, but maybe there's other ways that we could employ this functionality, right? Maybe this doesn't have to be necessarily a musical sequence generator. Maybe this can be some other thing, right? What if we just use a four-step sequence from the voltage block for our musical sequence, for our note sequence? Calling it a musical sequence maybe is demeaning because it's all musical sequences. Let's call it the note sequence. Let's send that. I'm going to make this a four-step note sequence. I'm going to randomize a sequence from the voltage block, and then we'll send it a clock. Yeah. That was super high pitched randomly. Okay. That works. Okay. So now we got a four-step note sequence. So clocked on this same tempo, we're going to take that pink noise generator, right? Now, we don't even have to send it through our quantizer at this point. We're just going to take the pink noise, the sample and held pink noise, right? It started out as a pink noise. And then every time this clock is pulsing, every time we're hearing a note, at the same time, the pink noise is being frozen and held at whatever CV level between, it would appear, -1 and 1 volt. Very slim amplitude pink noise. It's being held, right? If we were to just send the pink noise right in here, let's look at the pink noise. That would also be useful. So that's what the pink noise looks like naturally. We can see it's maybe venturing above 1 volt, just barely, occasionally, maybe below -1 volt. Slim range, but it's constantly fluctuating. And if we want to zoom out on that, then we can do that too. We can try to get some sort of a view. Is there any type of uniformity or pattern that's happening here? Not really. Okay, so that's just the pure unadulterated pink noise. But when we freeze that, when we sample and hold that, where was it coming? Oh, here it is. Right? Each one of those steps is where the clock is pulsing. And the level it's jumping to is whatever that fluctuating position of that white noise happened to be at the moment of clock pulse is frozen for that long until the next clock freezes it again. Looks again and freezes it again. Looks again and freezes it again. Slow down the clock, then it looks at a much slower rate. Every step we hear on the musical, in the musical pattern is another moment when that white noise is being pulled and frozen by that same clock. And if we do that fast enough, of course the musical notes are gonna go crazy, but let's just look at what happens. Right, we do it fast enough. Our sample rate is happening fast enough, right? This is how digital audio is made. We're sampling an analog signal. Every certain number of times a second, we're freezing and recreating that analog signal in a digital form. This is exactly how your computer works, right? It's just sampling at 44,100 times a second, or 48,000 times a second, or 96,000 times a second. We have the ability with a sample and hold module to do that very slowly or very quickly. And if we do it fast enough, we get a pretty accurate representation of what the incoming original signal is, right? That's how sample rate works. That's how sampling in a digital to analog, or an analog to digital converter, or the other way around, a digital to analog converter works. It's doing it very, 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 very fast, many, many, many times a second, 44,000 times a second, at least. That's kind of our standard at this point, the lowest standard. Maybe you're recording at 48 or 96 kilohertz in your computer, and that's basically the same thing. We're just able to turn that way down and turn that into some chunky, different kind of signal. Maybe not something we would want to do in, you know, basically with the audio interface on our computer. It's something that we could do with a DC coupled audio interface like the Expert Sleepers ES8 or something like that, like the Motu. Many audio interfaces we could use for that now. Okay, point being here, we've got this step signal. This step signal is constantly changing. The frequency on the musical sequence is not changing. It's a 4-step sequence that cycles. If we patch this fluctuating sampled and held signal into some other parameter on the oscillator, on the filter, on some effects, or something like this, we can modulate the sound over time, get some interesting, maybe musical, subtle change within a 1 to -1 volt range, right? There it went to 1.5. Let's try it. Let's send this into, you know, some of the other inputs on plates. Timbre. Excuse me, time for a sip of coffee. It sounds kind of muddy on this particular mode. What about morph? This mode we might not hear morph so much. Let's try harmonize. Or let's try a whole other mode. Now we're modulating the model. What if we go into the FM input and turn up the FM attenuator? Now what I'd like to do is get a much more high amplitude noise signal, because I'd love to be able to play with this doing more chaotic, grungy, grimy stuff. I'm looking around in my system to see where I can get some noise. And of course, you know, if we quantize that signal first, the noise signal, right? The musical passage that we're hearing right now from Voltage Block is doing its thing. And now we're quantizing the noise signal, sending that into the FM input. Okay, let's also try. What else were we going to try? We were going to try. Oh, yeah. Let's find some noise. Let's find some more high amplitude noise. And might be able to use this integrator over here. Let's try this. That doesn't look like it changes the amplitude much. Okay. Let's try the dial-up. I don't know if you guys know dial-up. This is from the Mofenzief modular collection. Dial-up basically is generating dial-up modem tones. And I think we might need to trigger it. So oh yeah, that's a much bigger signal there. Okay, and let's see. If we speed up the sampling, we can probably see the noise. Okay, so there's the that's like a -5 to +5 volt range. Very noisy, very chaotic. Do we want to hear what that sounds like? Let's try it. Okay, and I guess live patching went out the window. Sample and hold it is today, I guess. All right, let's see if we can get this in here. Oh, wait. Yeah. That's dial-up. Genius module. And maybe we could even patch it a little bit so it's constantly doing weird stuff. Let's try it. Oh yeah. Okay. So that's pretty chaotic. That's enough of that. Don't have to listen to that anymore. Okay. We're going to take that signal, that crazy, chaotic signal. We're going to send that now in here. And I think the way that DivKid's module works is we've got trigger input, right? We have a sample and hold input. That's our CV input. And then without anything into the sample and hold or CV input, I believe it's already generating pink noise. So if we trigger it, it's going to sample and hold that pink noise out of two different outputs. One is a positive output, meaning it's only going to be in the positive voltage range. There won't be anything below 0. If we sample and hold that and send it to the pitch of our oscillator, the voltage will and the pitch as a result will go up from the tuned pitch and back down to the tuned pitch at 0 volts. The other output, right? There's two inputs, trigger and the sample and hold slash CV input, and then two outputs, the positive sample and hold output and the positive negative, the bipolar sampled held output. So two outputs from each of the three sample and hold devices. That equals out to 6 different sample and hold signals, potentially. I don't know if the trigger inputs are all normaled so that you can just trigger one and they all trigger together unless you have them independently triggered. But again, it's like a specificity of the module. I just don't know. Okay, so we've got this crazy module or a crazy noisy output coming, right? Let's sample and hold it a little bit slower than what we're hearing or seeing now. Okay, we're slowing down the clock instead of, maybe thousands of times a second, which will basically just recreate that sample, that incoming signal as a digital signal. Now we're sampling and holding it at a much slower rate. And when we turn on that channel, then we should hear. Okay, and now we need to route that signal somewhere else in the patch. So much wider range of signal though right now, right? Let's just take that signal and patch it. Yeah. Okay, so now a minute ago, let's recall that we were using a -1 to +1 volt signal, right? Uh-oh, what's happened now? There it goes. That pink noise coming out of that Sputnik modular noise section was so low amplitude that it wasn't really even having an effect on the patch points on plates. Now, I don't know if that's just because it's such low amplitude. 1 volt isn't that much, and maybe these modes don't respond very drastically to 1 volt change. But a 5 volt change in either direction is having some effect. And we don't have a gate or anything even patched up yet. We're just hearing the direct output from plates. We could send the clock signal into its trigger input. That sequence was getting pretty boring. Hey, thanks for the super chat, Marky. Okay, so we got this thing going. Let's quantize it. Let's take this wider range signal. Let's send it through our quantizer. So now this much more high amplitude fluctuating sampled and held signal is being quantized, sent into the volts per octave input on our synth. Seems like it gets into a certain mode and it flattens out, but then it kicks right back on. And notice we're getting this positive and negative signal. It's a bipolar signal, and the negative range is sending the pitch way low, right? 5 volts below our current tuning is very low frequency. But now it's all over the place, right? Now it's a lot more chaotic of a signal, even with the what am I trying to say? The quantization. That's what I'm trying to say. Now we just have it doing major triads. So if we had many sample and holds, which, you know, I have another kind of dedicated sample and hold up here in the form of another module, modulation orgy. We can send it a clock and have its signal come down here and control some other aspect of this patch. You know, it doesn't have to be in time, but might be even more interesting if it's in time. So let's clock it as well. Let's see. I need a longer cable for this. The Woggle Bug is another sample and hold module. There we go. Bazzy makes a great point. This extreme version of this signal doesn't necessarily need to just come in here unadulterated, just, you know, plus minus 5 volt range no matter what. We could send it into a VCA channel. Let's do that. Let's send it into one of our channels on Veils. And let's just mute these channels for a second. And then we can come out of that channel on Veils into our CV input. In fact, yeah. Okay. So it's still going to look like it's the full range here, but so we're using an attenuator, basically. We're using a VCA as an attenuator in this case. Put it into linear mode. And as I start to very slightly open up that attenuator, the VCA in this case, it starts to let in a slim range of signal to my quantizer. Of course, the quantizer is holding that information. Might be useful to visualize this side by side. So let's patch this over here as well. And then we'll come out of that to our quantizer. So green line is the original, blue line is the attenuated version. And as we open up the VCA, the blue line is going to get closer to tracking perfectly the green line. And as we increase it, we're going to get a higher amplitude signal going into the quantizer and eventually into our oscillator, which means more pitch range in this particular case. Bosley was a step ahead of me there, I think. Though I'm only seeing your message like a minute or 2 minutes after I'm actually doing this stuff, so. So an attenuator, an attenuverter, right? We sent this into one of our central channels on maths or something like this. Might be a really interesting way to play around with this signal, modulate this signal. We could use other sequences to add together with that attenuated signal and get all kinds of crazy, very interesting, evolving, maybe generative material. Right? I'm just hand operating this VCA. What if I sent a signal into a CV signal into it, modulating it like an LFO? Sequence. Okay, what if we took all that to finish it off? Let's patch this into our reverb. Robert mentioned track and hold, which rather than just sending the held sampled signal that's been held, allows the incoming signal to be passed through the module, maybe adding a little bit of variability there. Good difference. Maybe still useful, right? Maybe like, especially for modulation sources, that could be a very useful thing, I think. I was not using the or the VCA as an attenuverter. I was just using it for amplitude control of that incoming sequence. An attenuverter would be cooler, frankly, because not only could you attenuate that signal, but you could also invert the noise signal. So, not doing any inversion with the VCA, of course. It's just a dumb VCA. All it can do is control the overall amplitude of that signal. Big shout out to Mordax for the data. They didn't send me that module. I bought it, but the data is super useful. There are other oscilloscopes. There's one called the DSO Nano, which is arguably much cheaper, but much more limited. It does have an 1/8 inch input. I actually have one here. The battery's dead, but it doesn't want to zoom on that. But it's got an audio input, channel audio input, and powers via USB. It's open source, so you could reprogram it as well. But that thing you could probably get for $50 compared to $400 for the Mordax. But you don't get 4 channels. You don't get all of the other functionality of the Mordax, which is extreme. It can act as 4 independent oscillators. It can act as a 4-channel clock generator and multiplier and divider. It's a fantastic multi-use module. The O-Tool is a good one too. I think that's a much more space-efficient module. I don't know how deep that module is, but panel-wise, it's a lot more space-efficient. However, I needed the Mordax because on camera, it's a little bit more friendly, right? It's a bigger screen. It's a little bit more engaging with the different colors and things like that. So just for having it for useful musical purposes, that's what I'm doing there. Okay. Well, I think we're gonna call it a day there. Full hour talking about sample and hold is pretty extreme, I'd say. But Marky, I see your request there, and maybe we'll do the 5-step and sequential switch next time. Play around with that stuff then. Yeah. Hey, thanks for joining us, guys. Go check out some of these other streams going on and support your modular family, and have a great weekend. We'll see you next time. I'll let you know this week what's going on for next weekend and any upcoming exciting streams. Let us know again if you have any thoughts and ideas, any requests, things that you'd like us to cover in up and coming weeks. And as I mentioned, with this upcoming school break that I'm lucky enough to have, we might be doing some little drop-in live streams here and there throughout the weeks coming up the next 3 weeks or so. So I'm thinking about doing one or maybe many on setting up my live show. And I've been itching to do that and trying to find a way to kind of integrate that into what we're doing here. So I thought that might be interesting for us to talk about in general. All right. next time, see you next weekend. Take care, guys.